everybody. We're now launching Theme 2, where the focus is on building caring communities. And so we're really thinking about how we might change our own work situations and our workplaces to support an ethic of care and caring. And also to think about how we might care for ourselves and care for others as well. And using a sort of a play on words where we're thinking about more careful ways. So I've been really inspired by Alison and Trina's and long list of authors here with their paper for Slow Scholarship, A Feminist Politics of Resistance Through Collective Action in the Neoliberal University. And if you haven't had a chance to read that yet, it's in our prepare materials off the webinar main stage page, and it's also in our book pantry. And it's a really, it has really saved me, actually. I did a blog in the Research Whisperer, and it was called Saved by Slow Scholarship, and it was really a result of reading this wonderful work that Alison and her team and Trina and her team have done. And so we're going to be really blessed to have several of the authors talk to us across this session and the next. And Professor Alison Mounts was due to join us as part of this session, but her son has fallen ill, and so Trina is taking the heavy lifting there, but we send our best wishes to Alison and Jennifer and Henry. So Trina is an associate professor of geography at the State University of New York at Buffalo. So Trina, you're joining us from New York. Welcome.
Thank you.
And she's a human geographer who's interested in how regulation, activism, and market mechanisms such as ethical consumerism jointly drive corporate change and sustainable development. So welcome, Trina. We're really looking forward to you taking us on our journey where we're thinking about the life of slow scholarship.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to Ali Black for inviting us. This is a really exciting new type of conference for us, and so we're happy to be part of it. Also to Rachel and the whole team who's been putting this together. I know it's been a lot of work, and so it's exciting to be able to connect with people from other places. I also wanted to mention that we really appreciated the open letter from Mabo Kang, Tracy, and Catherine, encouraging us to think across different in the academy. And so that's something that we hope to engage both through this talk and in a panel session afterwards. So just to give a little bit of a preview of what I want to talk about and what Alison and I had been discussing was that we wanted to give a sense of the life of the slow scholarship idea. So how we came to write this paper, what slow scholarship means to us, because I think there's a lot of different definitions out there. And then, kind of some key moments in the life of the idea. And then in the panel session following, we've got 3 more members of our collective, which I'll talk about in a second, who will be specifically talking about putting slow scholarship into practice and into context, especially in their Canadian universities. So I want to give you a sense of where this idea came from. But as I'm talking, I would love to hear from anybody who's joined in. It's a bit weird to be talking to the void, but I'd love to get the feedback on whether you've heard of this idea of slow scholarship, not necessarily just our version of it, and what it means to you, and maybe whether you put slow scholarship into practice. So I know that Ali is going to be kind of collating feedback, and I will maybe ask for her to summarize at some point. So this all started really with a workshop in 2013. Alison Mounts and some of her colleagues were the ones who organized that workshop and brought together 25 female scholars, geographers from around the Great Lakes area across the United States and Canada. And so this idea of slow scholarship and promoting an ethic of care really started with that workshop. And the workshop was organized with this ethic of care in mind. So specifically, they started by saying, we don't want you to prepare anything. We were all kind of frazzled from the end of another semester, and came together to share ideas and strategize for ways to really, remake the university in a vision that was more inclusive, and that didn't lead to the types of mental health problems that we were witness to. So the other way that I want to situate this is that we recognize at the outset the silences in our group. So while there was, there's some diversity across our experiences, we are all geographers. Most of us were at the time on the tenure track. Those 11 of us who got together to write the slow scholarship paper really are, kind of recognize our privilege in being on the tenure track, most of us having tenure in mostly public universities and institutions. So we recognize that that's a very specific type of situation. But we were kind of drawn together within a specific context. So one of the contexts was there was beginning to be a real recognition of a crisis of mental health across the academy and within society more generally. But in terms of students and faculty, there was starting to be a lot more reports, and recognizing that this mental health crisis was also not evenly distributed, and that it mirrored kind of broader patterns of discrimination and kind of dispossession across our society. So that was something that we felt both personally and that we understood more broadly as an unsettling trend in our society. The other context was that there were labor actions happening on some of our campuses, addressing contingent faculty and other kind of workplace issues. So really from the outset, there was this dual concern with personal issues of mental health and wanting to enact care for each other, those of us who were part of this collective that emerged from this workshop. And also wanting to look outwards and making sure that we could create broader change and a desire to really, change our institutions and more broadly engage in these projects of change within society. So this project is really more than a paper. So the paper is one part of it, but this is an ongoing collective. We've been involved in other actions. And specifically because today Allison is not here because she's dealing, with her own child and issues of care in the home, I want to recognize that the benefit of this collective is that we are able to step up at different points, and different members of the collective can step up. And it really was Allison who was the driver of the paper team. So I want to recognize that she was the one who stepped up during the writing of this paper. And so I'm happy to do my part now. So I want to move on maybe to what slow scholarship is to us. So we recognize that when we started talking about these issues, the term slow scholarship came up because there were, I think it came up to us in our discussions, and then we went and did our Google search to see if anybody was writing about this as well. And there was a slow scholarship manifesto that had been written by a scholar in Victoria, British Columbia. And a few, other kind of pieces out there talking about the need for a slow movement rather within the academy. So in some ways, at a certain point, I'd love to get feedback on this idea of naming it slow scholarship, because it's also led to some criticism. But I think if we hadn't engaged this broader discussion of slowness, we also probably wouldn't have had the reach that we've had and been able to have the conversations that we've had with people really around the globe, which has been exciting. So when we talk about slow scholarship, though, I want to reinforce from the outset that it's not just about time or temporality or actually slowing down. But when we talk about slow scholarship, I want to talk about the intersections of time, of counting culture in academia, of care and inclusion. And we do draw, we're not proposing this as something entirely new. We draw on a whole history within our own discipline of feminist geographers promoting and enacting an ethics of care. So just as one example, a geographer by the name of Victoria Lawson, whom we quote in the paper, writing about her role when she took on an administrative role. She talked about promoting caring geography, not just radical geography. And her quote was, "I've learned that service involves trying to build a culture of possibilities that allows creative people to do their best work." And so this culture of possibilities and this ethic of care is really central to what we were trying to promote. The other thing that I want to point to in terms of our building on other slow movements, such as slow food, which is probably the one people are most familiar with, there's been a lot written about slow food, and it's clear that it can become commodified, it can become elitist, but we wanted to point to the roots of what it could be, that really is, making social reproduction, the caring work, not just the work that happens in the traditional workplace, central to our politics. And so I do want to just read from our paper here, because I don't think I can say it better, especially at this time in the morning. But we point to 3 reasons why this is important. First, the demand for time is a distinct break from histories of class struggle being about material goods, centering socially reproductive activities. So that doesn't mean that we deny the other struggles or see them as lesser, but there has been a history of not centering social reproduction in these struggles. Second, advancing collective liveliness and flourishing advances feminist ideas of what it might mean to radically transform social reproduction, to transform our own caring work from drudgery to something collective, to something that can bring collective joy. And finally, rather than rooting radical transformation of daily life in grim austerity, slow food and other movements offer a more sensuous path. So I want to highlight this in terms of the radical possibilities that we saw in this idea of slow movements. Again, not just being about time, but about this centering of a new type of politics. So the second point is that, again, we were concerned about the acceleration of academic work in terms of these additional roles, not just the service, teaching, and research that makes up most of our jobs, but the other things that are imposed on us, really, that we see as not being in service of what we thought academia was supposed to be about generating new knowledge, engaging knowledge, serving students, serving causes of social justice, but that are really mainly about accounting for time, accounting for productivity and outputs, and things that can be leveraged really to move universities up world rankings. I think that is, kind of a common experience that we've seen, and that creates not only pressures on time, but a kind of psychological and psychic, I don't want to use the word despair, but in some sense is a despair that the work that we're doing is not serving a higher purpose that we had thought academia should serve. So it is about control and about what type of work counts. And just to give an example that may resonate with some of you, I know that all of our universities are run differently, but each year most of us have to fill out an annual faculty report accounting for what we've done for the year. And it is, in some ways a necessity because we do have a lot of self-determination in our daily activities. But what we found was that universities were increasingly implementing digital systems for managing our annual reporting. One is called digital measures. There are many others, but it requires us to account for our activities within some prescribed categories. And these prescribed categories are generally about outputs, about dollars, about numbers of articles produced, And they don't account, for instance, for, as Ali said, we talk about careful in a different way, careful, for careful work, for the research behind those outputs. And so there's nowhere in that digital measures that I was using at the time, for instance, to put in actual research time. It was only about outputs. And if you look at the even the kind of self-description of what digital measures is about, they talk about it as being a way for administration to leverage what faculty are doing. And again, I think there's a concern about this focus on leveraging in order to move up the ranks, rather than really engaging with and thinking through what we've done for the year, what we could do better in a different way. And so it's resisting those types of counting cultures. The other point that we make that I think is really important to reinforce is that the effects of this neoliberalization of the university, of this focus on counting cultures and a focus on productivity, is that it's written on the body. And so amongst our collective, we had experienced the burnout. We'd experienced the difficulties managing our other care work as mothers, as caretakers of aging parents, as mentors to students. And it is particularly pernicious, again, I mentioned this earlier, that it's written differently on different bodies. And certainly women of color in particular suffer more. And I know in the open letter from Mabokang and Tracy and Catherine, they talk about the extra burdens in the academy as there's this shift towards diversity, but the responsibility for explaining, for doing the work to make sure that people understand falls to those women, especially of color, and people of color in the academy. So we wanted to propose an alternative that didn't enact such, kind of violence on bodies in the academy. So I want to shift now to what does slow scholarship look like then? So there's a lot more that we could say about the kind of perniciousness of the neoliberal university, but I want to get to what it is that we were proposing. And so while there was some discussion already about slow scholarship out there, we wanted to promote a specifically feminist and collective vision for what slow scholarship could be. And so the first point is that it is not just about individual coping mechanisms. So a lot of institutions now have, programs where they try to provide through faculty and student development programs, ways to manage your time, ways to address your mental health by, promoting yoga and other self-care. And we see those, forms of self-care as important, but not enough. And that's not necessarily the focus of what we were talking about. We were talking about care as a collective enterprise, a broader sense of care that's missing from the academy, and really making care count. So instead of having care happen in private, having care be represented in the public life of the university, and also be recognized as work that academics are doing. And particularly, it often falls to female academics to do that work. So the promotion of slow scholarship is allowing for this care to become more visible and more public and more counted. And finally, political, so that care recognizing the other feminist theorists and feminist activists who have shown that care work is also political. So making care work visible, counted, and political. So we had, some initial suggestions for actions, and some of the pushback that we've gotten on our paper. We've been really excited, and it was really moving to hear Ali's introduction about how the paper moved her, but we've also gotten pushback that the specific suggestions that we were promoting while we were talking about a collective enterprise, to some they were seen as managerial, or as individualizing. But I just want to give a few examples to show how we were arguing that if these things are undertaken collectively, that they become political. So as an example, if we collectively turn off our email on the weekends and only say answer emergencies from maybe students who are struggling, but not answer, managerial institutional requests for, whatever information or form that needs to be filled out. If we do that collectively, we create different expectations for what academic workers should be doing at different points, and for the ability to also enact care in our private lives. So these things can only become political, though, if they're enacted collectively. If it's just done individually, then as people have rightly pointed out, it will be contingent faculty and the precariat within the academy who suffer because they will not have the power to be able to do that. So it's up to those of us who are in the positions of privilege to change the culture and to start to enact these things collectively. Some of the other strategies that we talk about are counting what others don't. So while a lot of the discussion around slow scholarship is around saying no and taking time for care work, we specifically recognized that we didn't want to always say no, that we wanted to, say yes. There was a great quote that we use, I think, from others. And I apologize, I just have to find this. Yes, so this is from a Butterwick and Dawson article where they write, I never wanted to be someone who takes a no stance to the world. I want to be a person who says yes, but to whom and to what? And so again, this reinforces that the problem is that when that we are, kind of overburdened by projects and by, kind of mundane administrative tasks, that we don't feel services the causes of knowledge seeking, of teaching, of social justice. But we do want to say yes to other things, to say yes when we can be the tenure reviewer that recognizes a broader range of activities and knowledges, that we do want to say yes when we can be the mentor for a first generation or a minority student that may require additional attention and care as they navigate the academy. So we are not just taking a no stance in the service of self-preservation, but we are focused on taking an outward caring stance and saying no to specific things and yes to others. So I think that is really critical. And so I just want to end by summarizing that our goal is to change the definition of the ideal scholar. So not about simply or necessarily opting out of work and leaving it for others to pick up, but about opting out of the productivity machine, about doing work in ways that are mindful and constructive in building the kinds of workplaces and collectives we want to be part of. It's not about nostalgia for a past when the ivory tower provided more time for individual academics to think, but about asserting a different vision for the future, a collective and feminist vision for academia. And finally, when we talk about slow scholarship, we take a broad view of scholarship. It is not about individual slow scholars or just about research, but it is about the broader enterprise of creating different academic institutions. So since I've been talking for quite a bit of time right now, before I address some of the kind of key criticisms that we've responded to, I don't know if Ali has any input from those of you who are listening about whether you'd heard about slow scholarship, what slow scholarship means to you. I'm happy to maybe do a bit of response before I move on in my comments.
So Trina, there are a few little comments, and you can also read the chat too by pressing the chat in the sidebar.
Okay.
But so some people are saying, so Tracy's saying the first time she's heard about slow scholarship is actually in the program for our Making Shift Happen.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine's saying slow equals mindful, conscious, thoughtful scholarship. I can't see the name. I think it's Rachel. She's been influenced and inspired by this, your collective's paper, and she's actually drawn on your ideas in her own research. So we've got a real range of people who haven't heard of it to people who are using and engaging. And Helen is talking about taking time and care so that the processes of scholarship are as important as and nurturing as the product.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was a good kind of reminder maybe to talk while I explained that our goal was to see scholarship in a broader light, but not to forget the actual scholarship and research enterprise, because we do want to rethink that as well. So I appreciate the comments about mindfulness, about process over product in the research. And I do think that part of our argument was that it's not just about highlighting the social reproduction that we do, but that it can create better research outcomes, meaning that not necessarily more articles, but longer term engagement with communities, more carefully thought through ideas. And so that is definitely part of the vision as well. So I do think it's important to go through some of the key criticisms that have been raised about our work, about other work promoting slow academia in many variants, and to kind of give our initial response to those criticisms, but also how they've encouraged us to grow in our thinking. And here, some of these responses are really my own individual. I can't speak, while we are a collective, the way we work is to write our individual experiences and then to write collective responses to those experiences. So it is a mixture of the individual and the collective, and that's what this presentation is as well. So I don't presume to speak for all of my colleagues. So the first key criticism is that we are falling prey to the kind of the elitism of many slow movements by promoting strategies that only those in privileged positions, especially tenured faculty, can enact. And that there is an inability for others to be slow scholars. And not only an inability for others to be slow scholars, but that our ability to be slow scholars really requires additional work and additional burdens to be placed on contingent faculty, graduate students, service workers, both within and outside the community. And so I do think there's something important there that we do need to think through the consequences of slow scholarship strategies. And in the paper, we are cognizant of that. And in each of our strategies, there is an attempt to recognize what should be done by us as tenure track faculty member in order to create space for others to be part of and thrive in the academy. So we are not arguing that everybody can engage in the same strategies. And we recognized that this was a kind of situated proposition for what we should be doing as tenure track faculty to change the culture and therefore allow others to thrive. But I do think it's an important maybe provocation that we didn't go far enough. Especially there was a recent paper that was published that encourages us both to historicize the university more in settler colonial relations and to extend our analysis out beyond just university workers. So again, to think about care workers who may be taking care of our children or taking care of our homes, to think about all of the other connections we have beyond the university and the implications for some slow scholarship for those people. So I do think that's an important provocation. The second is that we are romanticizing the university or academia by arguing for a slow scholarly life, I guess. And that it is a desire to return to some romanticized past. And I think I've already addressed that a little bit in the discussion, But again, just to emphasize that we are not, kind of succumbing to nostalgia, but that we are really promoting a different way forward. And that it's not about the ability for individuals to be slower, but it's for this focusing and this highlighting of care and caring relations and care work. Finally, I think this is an interesting one, that there is not a recognition in our writing about the utility of social media and the benefits of fast scholarship. For instance, to do activist work, to be allies, and what some have called accomplices to social movements that can bring real social benefits. And I think that's something that we have discussed but didn't necessarily wrestle with in our paper. I know that amongst our collective, some of us are on Twitter and some of us are not. Some of us engage more in social media and do see the benefits and the potential for reaching a broader audience by being a presence, and by then allowing our work maybe to have a broader impact on other publics. And for others of us, it just seems, the social media seems as another burden that we're expected to shoulder, and that we're expected to then show the results of our presence on social media and what is the product of that work. So I think it's another important conversation piece that maybe we can get to in the question and answer in the panel. So as we've kind of responded to this criticism, I want to point to some kind of key moments in the life of the slow scholarship idea, both in terms of the positive response that we've gotten, and that is really kind of heartening to see how others are enacting slow scholarship, and then what we've done as a collective in response as well. And finally, wrap up soon with our current thinking about moving forward with the slow scholarship idea. So just a few of the responses that we've gotten. There have been many, but some that we've found particularly, kind of interesting and creative. We've gotten response from some people who have, for instance, enacted a Save Our Slides archive movement. And I apologize that I can't remember which institution this comes from. But there was this attempt in kind of our digital age to save some analog knowledge. And in this case, it was photographic slides archives that they were trying to preserve, and promoting that within this broader sense of slow scholarship and recognizing different forms of knowledge. We also heard from a group, another collective in New Zealand, and a woman, Sarah Kindon, who got in touch with us about how her and her colleagues who were going through the tenure process, which can be really isolating and a process that creates a lot of self-doubt, how instead of working on putting their tenure portfolios together individually, they would come together over food and wine and review each other's portfolios and help build each other up, rather than kind of seeing themselves in competition with each other and with the kind of standards of the university. So they were trying to use the tenure moment as a way to create a collective, sense of self and self-worth, rather than instilling more self-doubt. And so we've also collectively gone on to other things. So some members of the collective have worked recently on a mentoring article. So while mentoring was only a small part of the slow scholarship article, we've had more discussions and ongoing writing together about both what we've learned about mentoring at this stage, and also about the need for mid-career faculty members to be mentored as well, recognizing that we still feel like we're flailing sometimes. We certainly don't presume to have all the answers, and recognizing there's a need for mentoring, as well as trying to promote our own ethics of care in our mentoring ourselves. And finally, we've really wrangled with the Twitter problem. And I raised this a little bit earlier, but the fact that we called our article Slow Scholarship was probably one of the reasons why it's tweetable and why it's gotten attention. And we are really, we feel fortunate and honored that it's gotten positive attention and have a positive impact on some people. But it also lends itself to the problem of people just seeing the title and reacting to the title and not reading through what our feminist collective ethic of care that we're promoting really means, and just reacting to this idea of slow scholarship as being an elitist, individualized goal that is unachievable by most, and that is really about our preserving our positions and our own time. And so I think we're still wrestling individually and collectively with how, how we see the potentials and pitfalls of social media like Twitter, and also of naming our articles. So I think for me personally, the positives outweigh the negatives in that we've been able to have more conversations and being invited to forums such as this, which are really exciting. But there is that downside that our ideas will become limited to just the titles of our articles. So I would encourage that to be a point of discussion later on. And so I want to end with some current discussions that we've been having amongst us. And I want to make sure, because Allison couldn't be here, that I represent kind of two trajectories in our thinking about what this idea of slow scholarship means to us now. And so maybe I'll start with Allison's writing here in our collective Google Doc that we put together. Because we were thinking about some kind of bigger ideas of where we can take slow scholarship further. But Allison writes, I tend to be more focused on the present than the future, the day-to-day, the deep irony of trying to make this talk even happen in the chaos of complicated lives of parenting, working, commuting, and existing. Not a lot has changed. Excuse me, not as a lot has changed since those early conversations for me. I still experience a lot of people, students and colleagues in crisis around me, and vacillate between feeling hopeful that change is possible and despair about the ways that universities keep changing. And so I think that's really important, that this process of enacting slow scholarship is really about the day-to-day and about addressing day-to-day crises. And that in and of itself, enacting that type of care, as I said, is political, because it is about making space both for the other aspects of our lives as scholars, the parenting, the taking care of aging parents and others, but also making space for different kinds of bodies in academia, different types of students and colleagues. At the same time as we're busy addressing those day-to-day crises, we're also thinking through what slow scholarship could mean in the long term as our own legacy, so to speak. So I was the one, I have to say, who raised this word of legacy, and we went back and forth wrangling with this problem of this idea of legacy. But I just want to point to why I started thinking about this. I have some mentors from my own graduate career who've retired, and we wanted to do some panels at our American Association of Geographers meetings. This is kind of a common happening when people retire. Your students get together and put on panels kind of in honor of an advisor. And this particular mentor of mine was very uncomfortable with this idea. And so she didn't let us do it the first year after she retired. This year, though, we are moving forward with some of these panels. But her kind of insistence and her main criteria was that we didn't talk about her, but we talked about ways that we can move forward on social and environmental justice causes, and ways that her students were doing this in a variety of ways. And so it got me thinking about the fact that I had seen throughout her career moments when she made choices that did not advance her career, but in my mind cemented her legacy. And my sense of legacy was not cementing her name kind of in our discipline, but cementing an ethic that she instilled in her students and that we all take on. And so her students come in many varieties in terms of our, not just our individual identities, but also the types of theories that we draw from. But her provocation was always, who cares, when we talked about our research, meaning how can this do actual work in the world? And so for me, this was the legacy that she left, this ethic and this question that is in each of her students' heads as we move forward. But I got a kind of feedback from Margaret and some others in our collective that maybe we need to think of another word because legacy has too much baggage and masculinist baggage at that. And so Margaret threw out the idea of imprint. How can we think about a lasting imprint that we can have as we enact slow scholarship? Can we create an imprint on our students? But the thing that keeps kind of nagging at me is that I feel, we'll get to this in the panel discussion of actual practices, that we've been somewhat successful at creating an imprint in our interpersonal interactions with students and colleagues and maybe the communities in which we research. But an imprint on our institutions is what we are still struggling with, is how do we create that lasting imprint? And how do we both enact slow scholarship, but maybe also take on positions of power that can create those lasting imprints? And so I want to maybe leave it at that and open it up for discussion and questions. And certainly we'll have more discussion of concrete practices in the next panel. So thank you everybody for being here and for listening to our ideas about what slow scholarship can mean and how it can be a political act.
Thank you so much, Trina. I've written a bazillion notes there. So much is resonant. So I'm wondering if the attendees would like to offer some comments and some feedback for Trina about some phrases or some ideas that that you find resonate also for you, or that you'd like to know a little bit more about, or that you'd like to sort of continue the dialogue. So Trina, are you able to look at the chat, or would you like me to just read for you?
So I am looking at, if I miss any questions, feel free maybe to jump in. I'm not sure if let's see. So I have from Shiva, the demands, discussion of the demands and conditionalities attached to productivity in the grad experience, with a lot less flexibility maybe than we have as tenured professors, and that's certainly true. So the question is, I was wondering if you can reflect on this maybe from your own experience, slow scholarship and the grad experience. And so, yes, I think this is a really important question and something that is of concern, and I'm not sure this is providing comfort, but something that is of concern to me is that I'm seeing, because of the kind of productivity machine that's been created in universities, this expectation that graduate students have so much more in terms of productivity on their CVs when they go into the job market. And so I regularly feel really lucky that I came out of grad school at a point when I could get a job without having to have, this list of publications, as well as having done, kind of slow and good research. But I will say that despite, the kind of somewhat unforgivingness of that job market, there are also those of us who are on job search committees who do our best to look beyond numbers. And so I have been heartened to be on search committees where the discussion was not just about bringing in for interviews the people with the most publications, but we really did go beyond that. The other thing that I think was really important for my own grad experience was that it was a collective enterprise. So I have been lucky to have been involved, even if they weren't collectives by name, in many collective enterprises. So for me, graduate school, while my research was individual, it wasn't done with other graduate students, the whole experience at every stage of writing research grants, of reading each other's dissertation chapters, preparing for conferences, sharing rooms when we went to conferences, that was really a collective enterprise. And there was an ethic of care amongst the graduate students. And I think something that is important and that I've seen in the graduate students who, I think in my own institution who are kind of doing well in terms of mental health is that they have formed a collective. And I think as faculty, we need to be on the lookout for those students who don't have that and think through ways that we can help them build that. I'm not sure if I see any other questions at this point. So I appreciate the kind of responses and the ways that those of you who are listening are kind of enacting slow scholarship, whether you used that term or not in the past. So I'm open to, I know that we will have an additional panel discussion in about an hour. So I'm open to additional feedback. We're also always open to provocations in ways that people might think slow scholarship could be limiting as a politics, as a political strategy. And we don't necessarily have to discuss it here, but I'm happy to discuss it afterwards as well, as I think the whole collective is. And we'd love to engage more people in this enterprise in the future.
So there's so much food for thought here. I guess one of the things that I think is an interesting theme, it came up in theme 1 and again here is this idea of mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering whether you and your collective, and I've just realised that Jen is here. Here I only just twigged onto that because Jen's got an interesting long tag there instead of a
Hi,
name.
Jen, and Margaret and Ranu, who are all members.
Oh, and Margaret, I've missed that Margaret's here. Yeah, Margaret's here. So, maybe it would be great if you could all use the chat, and I mean, I could probably see if I can upgrade you all now if you wanted to, or would you rather wait till that next session? But if there's conversations around mentoring or around mental health even, I'm you began with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take your advice from the comments, what your team would like to do in terms of whether just staying in the chat for the moment or whether you'd like me to promote you. Catherine, I think's written, I love the phrase thought making care count in accounting culture. So yeah.
Thanks, Catherine. Yes, and I don't think it's necessarily an easy thing to do, although again, I think something that we discussed in our mentoring paper and that is relevant to this idea of the practices of slow scholarship, such as making care count, is that we can enact minor disruptions, so to speak, in our roles as some of us have become department chairs or directors of graduate studies or undergraduate studies. And so when, for instance, we review faculty work, or when we put together promotion packages or put people up for awards, or all of the other ways within the institution, that we're able to make this care work visible and to make it count, so to speak. Just allowing people to discuss that in their, faculty reporting rather than requiring them to use the digital measures. And luckily in my own institution, we've shifted away from it and we can now write a narrative, which I think is really important. I don't know if Margaret and Jen and Rana want to talk about the mentoring article. I do think the mentoring article does tie in, Ali, you were talking about the mental health issue, because part of what we discussed, and I won't discuss the whole article, we can certainly upload it at some point. But one of the things that we talk about is how do we mentor different types of students? And one of our collective talked about the fact that, we've been successful in changing practices enough to recruit students of color or first generation students or other non-traditional PhD students, but they're not necessarily thriving in our programs, meaning both in terms of mental health or in terms of moving through the program. And there's a real concern that we still don't know how to adequately mentor students across difference. And so that's a conversation we really want to have with more, senior and mid-career faculty, is what can our role be, not just in getting them to the institution. And this is where I think the ethic of care really is political, because we can have, we can join, and it is important to join protests and to join calls for increasing the number of diverse faculty and students. But then we need to enact a different culture in the day-to-day to make sure that they thrive and to make sure that they're not pushed out of those institutions once they gain access. And this is a really, an ongoing conversation that we're still unsure of the best ways to do that. So within our own discipline, there's been a really, kind of heartening development of the Black Geographies Network. And they are filling a really important role of making Black geographers visible, for instance, at the American Association of Geographers conference meetings, which is thousands of geographers coming together and largely white, but there is a growing presence and a growing kind of network where they are reaching across institutions. So if you are the only person of color in your PhD program, you can now get mentoring from people in other institutions as well. But this also resonates with that open letter from Mabo Kang and Tracy and Catherine, that creates an additional burden on those who are organizing that network, and a burden that is not always counted for doing that extra work of even mentoring people from other institutions. So our, the way it relates, I think, to slow scholarship is making sure that there is recognition of that extra work and how important and central it is to moving our disciplines and our institutions forward. So I'm getting some feedback in the chat here. So let me just, so from Rachel, there's a question of engaging in slow scholarship in terms of our research process and speaking more to that. And then I will get to Margaret has some feedback as she was part of the mentoring article as well. So in terms of the research process, I think most of us have talked about the desire not only to have the time to think about problems and theories, but to have the time to really engage with research communities. And that means not just taking more time to do empirical work. A lot of us do qualitative work, and that takes a lot of time. So I am currently working on a project that is multiple years in the making. But my understanding of that complex issue is so much richer for having taken that time. But the other point is to count and to recognize the work of engaging our research communities after the research is done, but also engaging broader public debates. A lot of our research has policy relevance or relevance for activist organizations, and making sure that we have the time to do that follow-up. that it's not just on to the next research project that will get us more publications, but that we write op-eds, that we give talks to different publics, and engage in that way. So those are the two ways that I see, you know, taking the time, doing careful research, but also following up to make that research do something in the world. Okay, on the mentoring, I just want to follow up on what Margaret is saying here on the mentoring issue. So she says the mentoring issue is something we've been working on, trying to understand how to mentor mid-career as well as grad students. We recognize the intensity of grad school today as financial, family obligations, and the expectations to perform in a hyper-competitive and hyper-global industry. I think that's really important, that we recognize a shift even from, you know, our own recent past, well, I guess somewhat recent past, I still think of it as a recent past in graduate school, that it has become even more hyper-competitive since then. So she writes, you know, I think these are a few important, simple points that maybe we shouldn't have to reinforce, but we do. Do not exploit, nurture, make opportunities for, and defend graduate students in the system. So this is really important. If you are bringing in a first generation graduate student and there are questions from administration or colleagues about why they're not finishing in 4 years or 5 years, defending their process and their difference and their struggles. I think I really like that point from Margaret. So I don't know if people want a break and to move some of these discussions to the, what in our time zone will be 9 a.m. panel discussion, or for those of you who can't make the 9 a.m., I'm happy to engage any other ideas if you want to put them out there in the chat.
So I know there's a couple of Australians online, Trina, and it's 11 p.m. for those of us who are in Queensland and midnight for those of us who aren't in Queensland. So there are, so there's quite a few who are doing the midnight hours. So that's probably part of the, you know, the challenge of the time zones here.
Right. Yeah.
And yes, but it, you know, it'd be lovely if there are final questions, that if there are some questions, because we have a recording, and so many people will be watching this at a later time. So if there are things that people would like to write to Trina, or some kind of response, we don't have to continue going on. We can pick up again at midnight with the next session, which will also be recorded. So can we have a sense from the attendees what you'd like to do from here? So while they're thinking about that, Trina, I would just, I guess I'd like to just say how your article has been really helpful to me in that it has helped me understand that the personal is political, and I know I had a promotion application a year or so ago, and I deliberately put in a paragraph after engaging with your article about the work that wasn't counted in the form, that I had the specific spaces in which to write the grant and the income and the whatever, and right. I had a kind of open part in the application where I could write some other things, and I actually you know, took some of the ideas from your paper to say, and this is some of the work that I'm doing that isn't reflected in the measures in this document. And it was an interesting space. There were tensions there because of course I wanted to be promoted, so I didn't want to, you know, annoy anybody too much, but I did also want to suggest that the form was limited in
Yeah.
what it was documenting of my work, that it was beyond that. And yeah, so it has really, really helped me a lot. And then in our fourth session, in our final session, we've got the paper by Barbara Grant and Nikki Hare on the university as an infinite game, and they draw on your article too. And so that paper is on our book, in our book pantry, and also in our prepare section for participants who'd like to engage with that. So there's some lovely themes there too, about purpose and something bigger. And I guess that's kind of fits with your idea of imprint and legacy, even though you're wrangling with the term legacy, but
Right.
something that's more of an infinite game than these finite games. And that's the terminology that Barbara and Nikki and the two other authors in their paper use. So I'm wondering, maybe to finish off, is there a way that you'd like to talk to how this notion actually supports you, um, to feel more whole, or to connect you to your values and the essence of what matters? Like, we have all these drivers, we have all these metrics that we can buy into and are forced to buy into if we want to stay in the academy.
Mm-hmm.
But how, yeah, if you could just talk to us a little bit more about that kind of nature of what really matters, and how this
Right.
idea of slow scholarship has supported that. And then a few people have written some comments while I've been talking
Okay,
as
great.
well.
I will
Yeah.
respond to those as well. Well, first of all, I love that you were able to, take the message of the paper and actually enact that um, in your own life. And I'd love to hear at some point the reaction that you got to adding that. And I think, that is exactly, that was exactly our point of that there are these spaces for intervention in our daily academic lives. And by more and more of us doing that, hopefully it will start to change the culture. And maybe this is something to talk about in the next panel, administrators will start to see us differently. And maybe they will start to change those administrative processes. For now, though, we can do that. I think I do want to talk, and maybe I didn't speak enough in the presentation, about the tensions of enacting slow scholarship, because as you said, you want to get promoted, and I wouldn't say we want to become administrators. Some of us have taken on administrative positions, but there's a sense that we want to leverage the potential power that comes with those positions to create change. And so there is this constant tension between doing enough to maintain some power or gain some power within the institutions without sacrificing our values and our ethic of care. So I know I may be losing the question that you asked, but I know, as you said, when we're writing our narratives about our work, we include that work. When we're writing reviews, if we review other people's tenure files, we recognize and highlight, if they've done additional work in the community and engaged in, public debate or written op-eds, that we recognize the work. That something that I've been thinking about is that we need to recognize the density, say, in publications, not just number of publications, but by density, I mean, how much empirical work and how much time was behind these findings and revelations that get written into articles. And so that we can talk about that when we talk about, is this tenure package enough? It's not just about the numbers. We can do it when we're journal article reviewers. And I think something that I've taken on is to try to put in extra time to be constructive, even if an article is not yet ready, about finding a pathway, especially if it is a voice that is not regularly represented or a perspective that's not regularly represented, to help find a pathway to make it ready, not just to reject it. And I don't know if I fully answered the question, but I think I got a little bit in there. And so let me return to the chats here of what we can do. So one question here was from whom the bulk of the criticisms are coming from. And so I think it is difficult sometimes in the Twitter sphere or in the responses in other articles to get necessarily a sense of who exactly the people are. And I don't want to focus on naming names, but I would say there is an orientation that I think is important to recognize. And so there tends to be criticism by those who think that our actions aren't political enough, that there should be more emphasis on protest movements. And I think we all agree and do partake in protest movements, and that those are important to put your body out there in protest. But I think that we also all know people who may show up at the protest but don't in their mentoring of students or in their interactions with colleagues or even interactions with families, who don't do the care work. And so I think, our concern is when there is a focus on a hierarchy of political action and an argument that care work is not as political or not as important as other forms of protest and politics. And I think our argument would simply be that we wanted to highlight kind of social reproductive activities because they aren't always highlighted. And the personal is political and the interpersonal is political is not always recognized and enacted, even amongst those who might call themselves radical scholars. And so our response to that is always to make sure that we keep the ethic of care and the care work on the same, kind of political playing field. Let me see if there was something else that I missed. I think that was the last question. So Allie, I don't know if I fully answered your question, if there was anything else you wanted me to kind of expand on.
No, well, not really.
Okay.
I guess, so I'm getting the sense that this idea of slow scholarship is at the heart work and the body work of sort of all your decisions. Like, has it become I don't know what the right word is. Is it sort of like a compass for what you say yes to and what you say no? Like, has it become a very conscious, deliberate, intentional kind of compass for how you enact your daily work and your daily interactions and relationships?
Yeah, I really like that idea of a compass, of using that as a compass. I think that's a great framing of that. And yes, I think so I do want to say that it is the idea of slow scholarship that has become a compass, but it is also importantly the actual collective of women that I'm part of. And as I said, I'm part of this Great Lakes Feminist Geography Collective, but also other informal collectives of different types that allow me to feel that I can enact this because it's seen by the other members of the collective. It's valued by other members of the collective. And so I think that's really important, even if you feel in your own institution or your own department that you might not yet have convinced others of the need to change the culture, that you have a collective out there that sees the work that you're doing and that values and counts that work. And so I think that's been really important, that we can come together at conferences where sometimes it can be, those spaces, especially conferences where there's so much kind of self-promotion and other ways that can make you feel insignificant. That instead we now have a collective that can come together and talk about these other things that we're doing and the importance of it. And we are all really, dedicated to scholarship and research and want to be recognized as scholars and researchers. But we now have this support group within which we can talk about this care work. And that was part of what I was talking about, of making it public. And so even if it is not so easy to make it public within your own institution or department, that it is really important to build a collective within which you can make it public and counted.
That's a wonderful way to conclude, I think, Trina. So thank you very much. And I guess that's at the heart of this conference, is that we really want to offer gathering spaces where people can form connections and find other people that they might collaborate with and converse with. And I know collectives take time to form, and finding your tribe isn't instantaneous, but already in chats that we've had today, I know people have found like-minded souls, and so I would really encourage people who are here to continue these conversations, and where we have the live sessions, if you have time and you are able to jump in. But we also have the Facebook group where we would like to share things. So I know that Trina, you've talked about your mentoring paper, and you talked about another group, Sarah Kinden, was it, from New Zealand?
Right.
It would be lovely to continue sharing resources too with one another about ideas and people and projects that support this sustenance and this sense of we're not alone, and we have a collective that we can share and make visible our caring work to one another. So thank you so much. I wish that there could be applause that everybody could hear, but it's there. So thank you so much.
Well, and thank you to everybody on the chat, and good night to those of you who now need to go to bed. Good morning to those of you who are just getting up. And thank you again to Ali. It was really your engagement with Flow Scholarship has been inspiring to us, and I just want to reinforce that we do look forward to engaging beyond our collective here and to reaching out, especially across difference of place and identity and life stage, and would love to be part of future writing groups or resource sharing. So thank you for setting that up through this project.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And I look forward to engaging especially Margaret, Ranu, and Jennifer in the 9 a.m. hour here. So everybody take a stretch break, coffee, and as I said, good night to those of you who have to go to bed.